The Father is going to allow you to deliver a message to the world. He is granting you a second chance.
What was that?
Time moving. We are in the fullness of time and are moving about its corridors. This is the same sensation the Apostle John experienced when moving through the events in the book of Revelation. When you are no longer confined to time, you see things you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Tonight I shall delve into the esoteric, which I have come to view the meaning of that word, esoteric, to be defined as a craft, skill or art that has been reverse-engineered by the Church for the use of ministry to the masses. But as I was saying, the esoteric version of necromancy, the rituals and incantations I use to derive at least 1/3 of my knowledge from the spirits are so similar to the ones used in this archaic art that I would assume that whoever originally designed this practice must have been an in-depth scholar of Malik's spell books or a close pupil of his. So let us take a look at the right-wing practice of a left-handed path to forgiveness and salvation known as sin eaters. Now something I would like to point out to my acolytes in magic, in the Old Kingdom, when referring or casting from another sorcerer's specifically designed spell, it was courtesy of respect to set aside a small bit of history of that sorcerer somewhere within your tomes that are open for others to view and learn from. It was just proper manners back then that even arch-enemies adhered to, which is why there is always a section in every sorcerer's spell book that contains legends and lore of other sorcerers and their known spellcraft skills. Be sure to make note of that, as there are some who have curses that bring great misfortune to those that do not respect this golden rule. For those who are unaware of who Malik was, that name was merely adopted by the Islamic culture for an entity that the Prophet Muhammad had encountered that had shown him a glimpse into hell that was later portrayed in the novel known as the Divine Comedy under the tale titled Dante's Inferno, that depicts an upside-down spiraling mountain that shows hell to be sectioned into 9 different realms. The infernal angel called Malik was a legendary adversary of the Old Kingdom that is briefly mentioned in Hebrew texts as the ruler of the kingdom that lay beyond the Valley of Shadows in the land of the dead. Other names associated to this ancient enemy are the Necromancer Lord, the Shadow Master, the Dark Magus, but by biblical accounts of the bloodlines from Adam he would be known as Melchizedek, the 5th generation of the line of Cain and son of Methuselah, I think, or something close to that. As I understand it, he had come to retrieve a Blik or a Bruxas, who was hiding within the prophet after escaping from the infernal realm and convincing him he was Allah, the Islamic interpretation of basically God, who is known to have multiple intercultural depictions that can be summarized as the highest form of that which is virtuous, good, just, and is usually the highest level of authority in all that each culture understands exists. A sin eater is a person who consumes a ritual meal in order to spiritually take on the sins of a deceased person. The food was believed to absorb the sins of a recently dead person, thus absolving the soul of the person. Sin eaters, as a consequence, carried the sins of all people whose sins they had eaten. Cultural anthropologists and folklorists classify sin eating as a form of ritual. It is most commonly associated with Wales, English counties bordering Wales and Welsh culture. While there have been analogous instances of sin eaters throughout history, the questions of how common the practice was, when it was practiced, and what were the interactions between sin eaters, common people, and religious authorities remain largely unstudied by folklore academics. In Mesoamerican civilization, Tlazolteotl, the Aztec goddess of vice, purification, steam baths, lust, filth, and a patroness of adulterers, her name literally means sacred filth, had a redemptive role in religious practices. At the end of an individual's life, he was allowed to confess his misdeeds to this deity, and according to legend she would cleanse his soul by eating its filth. In wider Christian practice, Jesus of Nazareth has been interpreted as a universal archetype for sin eaters, offering his life to atone or purify all of humanity of their sins. A symbolic survival of sin-eating was witnessed as recently as 1893 at Market Drayton, Shropshire. After a preliminary service had been held over the coffin in the house, a woman poured out a glass of wine for each bearer and handed it to him across the coffin with a funeral biscuit. In Upper Bavaria, sin-eating still survives. A corpse cake is placed on the breast of the dead and then eaten by the nearest relative, while in the Balkan Peninsula a small bread image of the deceased is made and eaten by the survivors of the family. The Dutch doodkokes or dead cakes, marked with the initials of the deceased, introduced into America in the 17th century, were long given to the attendants at funerals in Old New York. The burial cakes, which are still made in parts of rural England, for example Lincolnshire and Cumberland, are almost certainly a relic of sin-eating. In Wales and the Welsh Marches the term sin-eater appears to derive from Welsh culture and is most often associated with Wales itself and in the English counties bordering Wales. Diarist John Aubrey, in the earliest source on the practice, wrote that an old custom in Herefordshire had been at funerals to hire poor people, who were to take upon them all the sin of the party deceased. One of them I remember lived in a cottage on Ross Highway. He was a long, lean, ugly, lamentable rascal. The manner was that when the core was brought out of the house, and laid on the bier, a loaf of bread was brought out, and delivered to the sin-eater over the core, and also a mazzer bowl of maple, gossip's bowl, full of beer, which he was to drink up, and sixpence in money, in consideration whereof he took upon him, ipso facto, all the sin of the defunct, and freed him, or her, from walking after they were dead. John Bagford includes the following description of the sin-eating ritual in his letter on Leland's Coletania. Notice was given to an old sire before the door of the house, when some of the family came out and furnished him with a cricket, low stool, on which he sat down facing the door. Then they gave him a groat which he put in his pocket, a crust of bread which he ate, and a bowl of ale which he drank off at a draught. After this he got up from the cricket and pronounced the case and rest of the soul departed, for which he would pawn his own soul. By 1838, Catherine Sinclair noted the practice was in decline but that it continued in the locality. A strange popish custom prevailed in Monmouthshire and other western counties until recently. Many funerals were attended by a professed sin-eater, hired to take upon him the sins of the deceased. By swallowing bread and beer, with a suitable ceremony before the corpse, he was supposed to free it from every penalty for past offences, appropriating the punishment to himself. Men who undertook so daring an imposture must all have been infidels, willing, apparently, like Esau, to sell their birthright for a mess of pottage. A local legend in Shropshire, England, concerns the grave of Richard Munslow, who died in 1906, said to be the last sin-eater of the area, by eating bread and drinking ale, and by making a short speech at the graveside. The sin-eater took upon themselves the sins of the deceased. The speech was written as, "I give easement and rest now to thee, dear man. Come not down the lanes or in our meadows. And for thy peace I pawn my own soul. Amen." Professor Evans of the Presbyterian College, Carmarthen, actually saw a sin-eater about the year 1825, who was then living near Llanwenog, Cardiganshire. Abhorred by the superstitious villagers as a thing unclean, the sin-eater cut himself off from all social intercourse with his fellow creatures by reason of the life he had chosen. He lived as a rule in a remote place by himself, and those who chanced to meet him avoided him as they would a leper. This unfortunate was held to be the associate of evil spirits, and given to witchcraft, incantations and unholy practices. Only when a death took place did they seek him out, and when his purpose was accomplished they burned the wooden bowl and platter from which he had eaten the food handed across, or placed on the corpse for his consumption. These references are dramatized works of literature and film that were molded from the basics of this religion ideal that operates based outside of the institutional structure of the church but within the boundaries of the spiritual belief and faith in God. Sin-eaters are guided and led by the spiritual aspect of the living will of God and the congregation of heaven and take their instructions from them, not the physical embodiment of the church. The 2003 movie, The Order, is a fictional horror story revolving around the investigation of the suspicious death of an excommunicated priest and the discovery of a sin eater headquartered in Rome. In the film The Bourne Legacy, 2012, the subject is used, by tells Cross that they are sin eaters, doing the morally indefensible but absolutely necessary thing, so that the rest of our cause can stay pure. The story is that a village has one person who is treated extremely well and whose job is to eat food symbolic of people's sins, so that he assumes all their sins so that they can die in a state of grace. The sin eater is extremely old and weighed down by the sins of hundreds of people. A young man is being groomed to be a sin eater. The old sin eater dies, and the first task the pure and innocent young man must do is eat the sins of the sin eater, including the lifetime of sins he has consumed, which, by extension, includes the sins of all the thousands that have been absorbed by endless generations of sin eaters. In other words, lured by the comforts to be provided by the adoring villagers, the young man becomes the most damnable person in history. His only hope is that one day, many years later, another young man will be similarly lured into eating all the sins that this young man will have to bear. The American TV show Sleepy Hollow used the term Sin Eater as the title of Season 1, Episode 6, as a way to introduce another character on the show that is a Sin Eater. The American TV show Lucifer used the term Sin Eater as the title of Season 2, Episode 3, to refer to the content moderation employees of a fictional social media company. In the American TV show Succession, Jerry, Waystar Royco's general counsel, suggests to Tom Wamskins that he become the family sin eater and destroy evidence of illegal activities aboard the company's cruise lines. Have you ever heard of the sin cake eater? He would come to the funeral and he would eat all the little cakes they'd lay out on the corpse. He ate up all the sins. And you know what? The sin cake eater was very well paid. And so long as there was another one who came along after he died, it all worked out. So this might not be the best situation, but there are harder jobs and you get to eat an amazing amount of cake. Now this craft was explained to me to have been an actual order of mysticism within the church, but not officially linked to the pontificate, as it states in scripture that God frowns upon those who use witchcraft, necromancy, or sorcery. Which, as far as I'm concerned, for those Bible thumpers out there who deny that magic exists, well, it's obvious by your standards of what is and isn't reality, states that magic is real but frowned upon by the flying diaper nugget grab factory with wings who shouts from 2,000 years away yelling "do it and I'll spank you." However, I feel like this is not true, but instead some culture in our past that decided to oppress mankind with their tyranny by manipulating the do's and don't list of the Bible, Rome more than likely. I come to this conclusion because for one, his entire ministry on earth are just a group of magicians saying prayers that are spells in disguise of protection. For another, the very origin of magic as I understand it was nothing more than the divine weapons of heaven that changed once wielded within the hands of man who is impure and prone to sin unlike angels, and so that impurity caused it to become magic. There are many other points, but I'd just be ranting if I continued, so moving on. I shall list this understanding here that I have come to of the eternal continuity of the immortal soul, which can be compared in contrast to show the purpose of the resolution of our sins not just within ourselves but its effect on others around us, and I shall include the best translation of the 7 deadly sins I have heard in a long time. All I can really say about the guy who wrote this is he gets it spot on. And hope I don't find out his name, for if I do he sounds to be the first worthy adversary to temptation and my role as the father of sin since the Christ child, and I clap my cleft hooves at the chance to argue the esoterics of his beliefs. Till my next sulfuric and brimstonian brain fart, K.I.O. Bella. The soul is the raw life energy before it configures itself within a physical body. Its source begins within the soul stream, a fountain of pure unmolded soul energy. All sentient beings, including animals and even bugs, life force originates here. Within the astral realm it becomes fused by elemental forces, finite particles, even colors that fuse and give metaphysical aspects that eventually become emotions. When the astral form develops emotions, it begins to experience death, and the weight of emotion pulls it inexorably down towards the physical mortal world. The astral form dies as the soul incarnates into a mortal body. The body lives and dies, and upon the physical body's death the soul transitions as it detaches from the physical encasing and becomes the spirit. Once in spiritual form, the deeds of one's life and the memories of those who knew you and the emotional effect your life left upon the physical world determines how long of a lifespan one has in spiritual form. Once the energy that binds the spirit to the physical aspect of the mortal world fades and the spirit is able to let go of that which connects and holds it to the physical world, then it is able to let go of all obstacles hindering it from crossing over into the spiritual realm of the luminescence field, and a reverse sensation is experienced to that of transitioning from the astral to the physical world that has been described by many as crossing through the tunnel of light, and is the final stage of physical material decay, and the spirit then dies and crosses over into the realm of complete bliss that is without emotional turmoil or strain, or heaven basically. There all become one with the Creator, and each is repositioned according to the will of the source of all creation. Some remain in heaven, some are given tasks first that lead them back to become a part of the soul stream once again, only this time they have new attributes that increase the eternal evolution of the cycle of life, and it begins again.
Christianity has traditionally spoken a lot about sinners. In the 4th century, the Church identified 7 deadly sins, failings of character that were to be particularly condemned and avoided by all righteous people. They were pride, being snobbish and boastful; envy; wrath, getting very angry; gluttony, eating too much; lust, wanting to sleep around; sloth, being lazy; and finally, greed. Christianity took these to be severe faults of the soul that marked out a person as a fitting target for scolding and punishment. God himself would, on the day of judgment, be remorseless with sinners and send them to spend millennia in the darker, more tortured bits of purgatory. We may not use precisely such traditional theological words today, and we may not imagine the creator of the universe as someone who organizes chastisement for people beyond the grave. But in the spirit in which we interpret failings of character and respond to people's less fortunate sides in the online and real worlds, we tend to retain a similarly damning and ungenerous set of attitudes. We may feel that through our harshness we're helping humanity to improve, but if this is really our goal, then it pays to move beyond mere condemnation in an attempt to understand what truly drives people in their more regrettable moments. We stand to stumble on a surprising truth. Behavior we call sinful is never simply that. It represents an unfortunate first response to difficulty and distress that could, if it were properly understood, guided and forgiven, be redirected towards nobler ends. We aren't evil so much as in a lot of pain in a series of areas. Let's consider each of the 7 sins in turn. Pride. It can appear as if we end up boasting and grandstanding because we're so pleased with ourselves. Far from it. Boasting is only ever a response to a feeling of invisibility. We badly need to thrust forward our own importance because behind the scenes our very right to exist seems so much in question. We see it as almost inevitable that others will think ill of us unless we urgently and dramatically assert our greatness. That's why, of all people, the proud don't need to be told they're terrible. This is precisely what they secretly think they are already. They need encouragement to feel a more genuine pride in their own merits, and then to be spared the manic impulse constantly to call them to the attention of others. Envy. Envy is a graceless way of confronting an idea that is, in other contexts, fundamental to decent ambition, as well as modesty of character. The notion that we are incomplete, imperfect, and in need of improvement. Envy grows from the legitimate insight that others have something to teach us, mixed together with a degree of inaccuracy and panic about what this might actually be. envy should, in a perfect world, be our teacher. We should note when it strikes us, sift through its confused signals, and use them to work out our direction and purpose. The solution isn't to be made to feel guilty for our envious attacks. It's to be helped to understand what's truly missing from our lives. Wrath. The mean, angry things we say when we're upset are almost never truly meant. They are the result of panic and anxiety. We call someone a stupid fool because we are, at that moment, terrified. We shout because we feel we're fighting for our lives. Therefore, instead of being repeatedly told how appalling it is to be angry, we of course know this quite well already. What we need is someone to demonstrate a proper understanding of our underlying fears. "You must be scared" is the kindest but also the most effective response to any angry outburst. It puts its finger on what's really going on. We need others to appreciate our fragility, not berate us for our roars. Gluttony. We eat too many chicken wings and toasted sandwiches, not because we're greedy, but because we're emotionally starving. We want love far more than we want calories. We're just at a loss as to how to find them. So the solution isn't to be told to eat less, as diet gurus and Christian theologians suggest. It's to be helped to discover new sources of kindness, security, and emotional connection. Our appetite isn't essentially bad. It simply hasn't found its ideal target. Our excess weight is a symbol of our background emotional undernourishment. Lust. We want to keep jumping into bed with people not out of degeneracy, but because we are lonely. Sex is the epitome of connection and acceptance. The so-called bad, erotic things we crave feel so exciting because we read them as proofs of someone else's open-ended affection, which is in such short supply in ordinary life. Ideally, we'd not be less lustful, we'd be clearer about what we genuinely need from sex, which is acceptance of our messy, complex, and all too human selves. Sloth. Laziness is really fear. We can't bear to get down to our work because, if we were to apply ourselves, we risk terrifying humiliation. We might not succeed as well as we'd like. We might find a task too hard. We may realize we're not yet equipped to undertake it or be mocked by the world. These aren't failings so much as hugely understandable worries. Behind our inaction is anticipated disaster, a catastrophizing mind. We will begin at last when the fear of doing nothing at all trumps the crippling fear of doing something badly. Greed. The powerful urge to take more than our fair share is really a reaction to a feeling of deprivation. We felt so neglected and vulnerable, we require ever more. Our fear is so entrenched, we're trying to keep it at bay by grabbing as much as we can as quickly as possible. To others, we may look already advantaged and privileged, but inside, we just feel desperate. In short, our so-called sins are not signs of being bad people. They are the shape our unmet needs take when we haven't found any better way of addressing them. We don't have to be berated or threatened with hell. We need an open affection that welcomes us as we are, a forgiveness that doesn't involve criticism, and a tenderness that delicately, without humiliation, locates our true vulnerabilities and encourages our own native appetite for reform.